The rain hit my face like tiny needles as I watched the movers throw my boxes into the mud. Water soaked through the cardboard, ruining everything inside. My clothes, my books, my father's photographs, all landing in dirty puddles while Tessa stood on the covered porch, perfectly dry, watching with cold satisfaction. "You should have left yesterday when I asked nicely," she called out, her voice carrying over the storm. "But you always were stubborn, weren't you?" I didn't answer. My hand pressed against the envelope hidden inside my coat, feeling the thick paper through the wet fabric. The original property deed. The real one. The one that proved everything she'd done was built on lies. "Dad never meant this place for you anyway," Tessa continued, louder now, making sure the movers heard. "You were always just the help around here. The one who stayed because you had nowhere else to go." My jaw clenched, but I kept my mouth shut. Let her think she'd won. Let her enjoy this moment of triumph. Because in exactly 3 days, when I walked into the county recorder's office with the document pressed against my chest, her entire world would collapse. I turned and walked toward my car, leaving her standing there in her designer clothes, queen of a castle built on forgery. 2 weeks earlier, everything had been different. I'd been sitting beside Dad's hospital bed, holding his trembling hand while machines beeped rhythmically around us. His breathing was shallow, each inhale a struggle that made my chest ache in sympathy. Tessa hadn't visited in 3 days. Too busy with her real estate deals in Boston, she'd said on the phone. Dad understood, she claimed. He wouldn't want her to sacrifice her career. But Dad's eyes had filled with tears when I mentioned her absence. He knew. He'd always known which daughter actually cared. "Tara," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the medical equipment. "The study. Behind the middle shelf. There's a compartment." I leaned closer, straining to hear. "The real papers are there," he continued, each word an effort. "The deed. In your name. Has been for 5 years. My heart stopped. "Dad, what?" "Trust them, not her," he interrupted, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "She'll try to take everything. But you have the truth. Just wait for the right moment." Those were among his last coherent words. He died 2 days later, with only me beside him. The funeral was everything Tessa excelled at. A perfect performance. She wore elegant black, cried at exactly the right moments, and accepted condolences with practiced grace. Everyone whispered about what a devoted daughter she'd been. How heartbroken she must feel. I stood in the back, dry-eyed and numb, watching her play the role she'd rehearsed her entire life. After the service, the lawyer gathered us in Dad's study. Harold Brennan had been our family attorney for 30 years, but today he seemed nervous, avoiding my eyes as he shuffled papers. "Your father's will is straightforward," he announced, clearing his throat. "The estate, including the house and all properties, passes entirely to Tessa and Whitmore." The room tilted. I gripped the armrest of my chair, staring at the document he slid across the desk. There was Dad's signature at the bottom, except it looked wrong. The letters slanted differently than his usual careful script. The W in Whitmore curved too sharply. Tessa dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "I'm sure Dad wanted us both to be taken care of. We can work something out, Tara." Her voice dripped with false sympathy, but I saw the satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Dad's signature on the will, the way it didn't match the birthday cards he'd written me, the letters he'd sent when I was in college. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. At 3 a.m, I got out of bed and went to his study. The house was mine for now. Tessa had returned to Boston immediately after the funeral, already making plans to sell. I stood before the middle bookshelf, running my hands along the wood Dad had built himself 40 years ago. My fingers found a slight gap in the panel behind the 3rd row of books. I pressed, and a small section swung inward with a soft click. Inside the hidden compartment was a sealed manila envelope, thick with documents. My hands shook as I pulled it out and broke the seal. The property deed sat on top, official and notarized. Filed with the county 5 years ago, transferring ownership of the Whitmore estate from Charles Whitmore to his daughter, Tara Lynn Whitmore. Name. Not Tessa's. Beneath it were letters in Dad's handwriting, explaining everything. He'd known Tessa would fight for the house. He'd prepared for it. I am Tara Whitmore, 32 years old, and for most of my life I've been invisible. Not because I wanted to be, but because that's the role our family assigned me. Quiet one. The helper. The daughter who stayed behind while Tessa chased her dreams in the city. I'd given up my college scholarship to care for Mom when she got sick. Tessa had been establishing her career in Boston, visiting twice a year with expensive gifts that couldn't replace her presence. After Mom died, I'd stayed to help Dad run the estate. The historic lakeside property had been in our family for 4 generations, and Dad had loved it with his whole heart. While Tessa climbed corporate ladders, I'd maintained the gardens, fixed the roof leaks, and listened to Dad's stories about our grandparents. I'd sacrificed my own dreams, architecture school, travel, independence, to keep our family together. And Tessa had taken that sacrifice and twisted it into proof that I was incapable of anything else. Now, holding the deed in my small apartment bedroom, I understood that Dad had seen everything. He'd known what Tessa would do, and he'd given me the tools to fight back. But I wouldn't fight with anger. I'd fight with truth. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic. 72 hours to vacate the premises, Tessa's lawyer had written. All personal belongings must be removed. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I read it twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in my growing file of evidence. Around me, the house I'd grown up in felt different now, like it was already slipping away, even though legally it was mine. Neighbors started avoiding eye contact when they saw me. Mrs. Palmer next door had heard Tessa's version of events. The selfish younger sister trying to claim what wasn't hers, refusing to accept their father's final wishes. I packed methodically, wrapping each item with care. Dad's favorite coffee mug, the quilt Mom had sewn, photographs spanning decades, and tucked safely in my coat pocket, always within reach, the original deed that proved everything. When Tessa's hired movers arrived 3 days later with the rain, I was ready. I let them throw my boxes in the mud. I let Tessa stand on the porch and gloat, because I knew something she didn't. I disappeared from town the next morning, packed my car before dawn and drove 2 hours to Portland, where nobody knew the Whitmore family drama. Tessa probably thought I'd crawled away in shame, defeated and broken. She was already spreading her version of events through our small town's gossip network. Poor Tara, unable to accept reality. Always unstable, hadn't I heard? Living in fantasy worlds instead of dealing with the truth. But I wasn't running away. I was regrouping. My first stop was the county recorder's office, where a patient clerk named Patricia helped me verify the deed's authenticity. She pulled up the records on her computer, then looked at me with new respect. "This is absolutely legitimate," she confirmed. "Filed and notarized 5 years ago. Your name is on the title as the sole owner. What about the will that gave everything to my sister?" Patricia frowned. "A will can't override a property deed that's already been transferred and recorded. If your father no longer owned the property when he died, he couldn't will it to anyone else. The law was on my side. I just needed patience, documentation, and the right moment to strike." Mr. Langford had been Dad's closest friend for 40 years. They'd served in Vietnam together, started businesses together, and grown old watching their children grow up. When I called him, he agreed to meet me at a quiet diner outside Portland. He was 75 now, retired from his law practice, but his mind was still sharp. When I showed him the deed and explained what Tessa had done, his weathered face hardened with anger. "Your father talked to me about this," he said quietly. "About 6 months before he died. He was worried Tessa would try something like this." "Did he say why he transferred the property to me?" "Because you were the one who loved it, who understood what it meant to the family." Mr. Langford paused. He said Tessa only saw dollar signs. She'd sell it to developers the moment he was gone. Which was exactly what she was planning. I'd seen the real estate listings she'd already prepared, marketing the historic waterfront estate to wealthy buyers from New York. Mr. Langford leaned forward. I have friends at the county courthouse. Let me make some calls. I think we'll find that the will Tessa presented has some interesting irregularities. While I waited in Portland, working a temporary job at a bookstore, information started trickling back to me through Mr. Langford and old family friends who'd begun questioning Tessa's story. The estate was falling apart under her ownership. She'd stopped paying the maintenance crew, let the gardens overgrow, and ignored the leaking roof that Dad had been planning to fix before he got sick. But worse than the physical decay was the financial disaster. Tessa had taken out a loan against the property, or tried to. The bank had noticed something strange. The title showed Tara Whitmore as owner, but Tessa Whitmore was applying for the loan. When questioned, Tessa had produced the will, claiming the transfer just hadn't been processed yet. The bank, smelling something suspicious, had flagged the application for review. Mr. Langford called me with the news, barely containing his satisfaction. She's making mistakes, Tara. Getting sloppy because she thinks she's won. What about the will itself? I spoke to Harold Brennan off the record. He looked sick when I mentioned the signature. I think he knows it's forged but doesn't want to admit he authenticated it. The web was tightening. I just needed to pull the right thread. I took a job at Anderson's accounting firm, a small business in Portland that needed temporary help organizing their files. It was boring work, but it gave me time to think and plan while my hands sorted through endless paperwork. During my lunch breaks, I researched property law, estate transfers, and fraud. I learned about chain of title, the importance of recorded deeds, and how difficult it was to overturn a legal property transfer even with a will. Through a contact Mr. Langford had at the county office, I obtained copies of every document related to the estate. Tax records, building permits, utility bills, everything. That's when I found the smoking gun. For the past 3 years, property tax bills had been sent to Tara Whitmore at the estate address. I'd been paying them automatically from my account, not thinking much about it because I'd handled the family finances while caring for Dad. But those bills were proof. The county recognized me as the owner. The IRS recognized me as the owner. Only Tessa's forged will claimed otherwise. I documented everything, creating a file that would be impossible to refute. 3 months after my eviction, Tessa threw her legacy gala at the estate. An invitation-only event celebrating the Whitmore family history, with Tessa positioned as the devoted daughter preserving her father's memory. The local newspaper covered it. I saw photos online of Tessa in an expensive gown, giving tours of the house, accepting praise for her commitment to maintaining the property. Except the photos also showed the cracked paint I'd been planning to fix, the gardens I'd lovingly tended now choked with weeds, and the porch railing that Dad had asked me to repair the week before he went into the hospital. I bought a simple navy dress and drove back to town for the gala. No invitation, no announcement. I simply walked up the front steps I'd climbed 10,000 times and entered through the door I'd never needed permission to open. The entrance hall fell silent when I appeared. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Tessa stood near the fireplace, frozen, her smile cracking like old porcelain. "I came to see what my father built," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the quiet room. "And what's left of it." Tessa recovered quickly, her mask snapping back into place. She laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Tara, how unexpected. I didn't realize you were in town." "I've been busy," I replied, accepting a glass of water from a stunned caterer. "Taking care of some legal matters." Her smile tightened. Before she could respond, a nervous-looking man in his 50s approached me hesitantly. I recognized him, Owen Fletcher, the accountant Tessa had hired to manage the estate's finances. "Miss Whitmore, could I speak with you privately?" Tessa's eyes flashed with warning, but Owen was already leading me toward the study. Once the door closed, he sagged against it like a puppet with cut strings. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. The guilt is killing me. He pulled out a flash drive from his jacket pocket. Everything's on here. The real financial records, not the ones Tessa told me to show the probate court. The loan applications she filed using a forged power of attorney. The appraisals she had doctored to undervalue the property. My heart pounded. Why are you telling me this? Because your father was a good man. And what she's doing, it's fraud. I won't be part of it anymore. Tessa cornered me in the garden as I was leaving, away from the remaining guests. Her perfect composure had shattered, revealing the desperate anger underneath. What are you doing here? She hissed. You have no right. No right. I interrupted calmly. This was my home for 32 years. I have every right. The will is very interesting, I finished. I've been learning a lot about estate law lately. Did you know a will can't transfer property the deceased didn't own? Her face went pale in the moonlight. What are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough. I started walking toward my car, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Tessa, you might want to check with the county recorder's office. I think there's been some confusion about who actually owns this property. I drove away, watching her in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the garden she'd let die, finally understanding that something had gone very wrong with her perfect plan. The newspaper article appeared 2 days later. Whitmore estate ownership under legal review. The reporter had done their homework. While they couldn't make direct accusations, the article raised questions about the discrepancy between the probate will and the county's property records. It mentioned the title showing one name while another claimed ownership through inheritance. My phone rang constantly with calls from people in town, suddenly remembering how I'd always been the one caring for the estate, how strange it had seemed when Tessa swooped in to claim everything. But the most important call came from Mr. Langford. The probate court has opened an investigation, he told me, excitement clear in his voice. Harold Brennan received a subpoena this morning. He's being asked to explain how he authenticated a will that contradicts the legal property records. What about Tessa? Her lawyer went silent, stopped returning calls. I think he's realized he stepped into something he wants no part of. 2 days after that, the bank froze all accounts associated with the estate pending the investigation. Tessa's contractors stopped mid-renovation, leaving tools scattered across the property. Creditors she'd been avoiding suddenly demanded payment. Her perfect facade was crumbling, and she had no one to blame but herself. The freeze on the estate's finances hit Tessa harder than I'd expected. She'd been living beyond her means for months, spending money she'd assumed would come from selling the property. Through the town grapevine, I heard she'd maxed out 3 credit cards. The expensive car she'd bought to celebrate her inheritance was being repossessed. Her Boston apartment, which she'd been subletting while planning to renovate the estate, was now her only residence, and she was 2 months behind on rent. Meanwhile, I met with investigators from the probate court. I showed them the original deed, the tax records in my name, the letters Dad had written explaining his decision. Every piece of evidence carefully preserved and documented. They listened with increasing interest, taking notes and making copies of everything I provided. This is quite compelling, Miss Whitmore, the lead investigator said. Have you had the signature on the will analyzed? Not formally, but I've been collecting examples of my father's actual signature for comparison. I pulled out a folder of birthday cards, letters, and legal documents spanning 20 years. The investigator placed them side by side with the will. Even to my untrained eye, the differences were obvious. The will's signature looked like someone had tried to copy Dad's handwriting but hadn't quite succeeded. 4 months after my eviction, I drove back to the estate. The long driveway was overgrown now, branches scraping against my car. The house looked tired, windows dark, paint peeling worse than before. I parked and sat for a moment, just looking at the home Dad had loved so much. The porch where he'd taught me to play chess. The garden where Mom had grown her roses. The dock where I'd learned to fish. It was falling apart, but it was still home. I walked through the rooms slowly, noting every crack, every stain, every sign of neglect. Tessa had only been in control for 4 months, and already the place was dying. In Dad's study, I stood before the bookshelf with its hidden compartment, now empty. "I'm fighting for it, Dad," I whispered. "Just like you knew I would." The house creaked around me, familiar and comforting. "I'm coming home." Tessa appeared at my Portland apartment on a cold November evening. I hadn't told her where I was living, which meant she'd hired someone to find me. That couldn't have been cheap. She looked different than the last time I'd seen her. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. The expensive clothes were the same, but they hung differently now, like costumes rather than power statements. "We need to talk," she said when I opened the door. I let her in but left my phone recording in my pocket. Mr. Langford had advised me to document any conversation with her. "I want peace between us," Tessa began, perching on the edge of my couch. "This fighting, this investigation, it's tearing apart Dad's legacy." "You mean it's tearing apart your plans to sell his legacy to developers?" She flinched. "That's not fair. I'm trying to do what's best. For yourself," I finished. "You're always doing what's best for yourself." "Fine." Her mask dropped, revealing the desperation underneath. "What do you want?" "Money. I can work something out, give you a percentage when the property sells." "The property isn't yours to sell. The will is a forgery, and you know it." I watched her face carefully. "Dad never wrote that will, did he?" Silence stretched between us. Then quietly she said, "He was sick, confused. He didn't know what he was signing. So you admit you fixed it. Made sure it said what you wanted." Her eyes widened as she realized what she'd confessed. "I didn't, that's not." But it was too late. My phone had recorded every word. Mr. Langford's next discovery was the final nail in Tessa's coffin. While helping me sort through Dad's belongings still in storage, he found an old laptop Dad had used during his last months. On it was a video file, dated 3 weeks before Dad went into the hospital. I sat in Mr. Langford's office, hands shaking as he played it. Dad appeared on screen, sitting in his study, looking tired but determined. "If you're watching this, Tara, it means I'm gone and Tessa has tried something. I'm sorry I can't protect you myself, but I can give you the truth." His voice was stronger than those last hospital days, clearer. "5 years ago, I transferred the estate to you because you're the only one who truly loves it. Not what it's worth but what it means. Tessa sees investment potential. You see home." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "If she produces a will saying otherwise, it's a lie. I never wrote a will leaving her the property because it wasn't mine to leave anymore. It was already yours. The deed is hidden in the study, behind the middle shelf. Everything you need is there." Tears streamed down my face as he continued. "You're the strong one, Tara. You always have been. Don't let her bully you. Stand up for what's right. And know that I'm proud of you, sweetheart. So proud." The video ended. The video leaked to the local news. I never found out who sent it. Maybe Mr. Langford, maybe Owen the accountant, maybe even Harold Brennan trying to salvage his conscience. But suddenly, everyone in town knew the truth. Dad's own words, recorded and dated, confirming that the property belonged to me and warning about Tessa's deception. The response was immediate and devastating for Tessa. The people who'd praised her at the gala now whispered about fraud and betrayal. The historical society that had honored her commitment to preserving the estate withdrew their award. Former friends stopped returning her calls. The real estate developer who'd been interested in buying the property backed out entirely, not wanting to be associated with a scandal. I watched it unfold from Portland, feeling not triumph but sadness. This was my sister after all. We'd shared a childhood, a family, a father. She'd chosen greed over that bond, but it still hurt to see her fall. Mr. Langford was less sympathetic. "She made her choice, Tara. She could have shared the estate with you, worked together to honor your father's memory. Instead, she chose to steal and lie. These are natural consequences. Still, when I saw her photo in the newspaper, looking hollow and defeated, I felt a pang of grief for what we'd lost. The final betrayal came from Derek Paulson, Tessa's boyfriend of 3 years. He'd been supportive throughout her inheritance battle, attending the gala, defending her to mutual friends, standing by her side. Until the investigation reached his own business dealings. Derek owned a construction company that Tessa had hired for the estate renovations. Under scrutiny, investigators discovered he'd been massively overcharging for work that was never completed, inflating invoices and pocketing the difference. Facing potential fraud charges himself, Derek turned over evidence to save his company. Emails where Tessa had discussed forging the will, text messages about hiding the original deed if they found it, and recordings of conversations where they'd plotted to sell the property quickly before I could challenge anything. He threw her under the bus to save himself, handing prosecutors everything they needed to build a case. When I heard the news, I felt strange. These were people I'd known, family connections that had seemed solid. But when tested by legal pressure and self-interest, everything fell apart. Tessa had built her entire scheme on sand, trusting people who were only loyal when it benefited them. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, less dramatic than TV shows made them look. Just a judge, lawyers, and the truth laid out in documents and testimony. I sat calmly while evidence was presented. The original deed in my name. The forged will with its mismatched signature. The video of Dad explaining his intentions. The tax records, the bank documents, the paper trail that proved ownership beyond any doubt. Tessa's lawyer had stopped trying to argue. There was no defense against this much evidence. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed everything carefully. Finally, she looked directly at me. "Miss Whitmore, you've had ownership of this property for 5 years. Why didn't you come forward immediately when the forged will was presented?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "Because I wanted truth to speak louder than anger, Your Honor. If I'd fought immediately, people would have thought I was just jealous or bitter. I wanted to gather evidence, let the law work properly, and prove my case beyond any doubt." She nodded slowly. "And you've certainly done that." The verdict came down on a gray December morning, exactly 6 months after my eviction. The court ruled that the property deed in my name was valid and legally binding. The will presented by Tessa was declared fraudulent. All rights, ownership, and control of the Whitmore estate were officially restored to me. Additionally, Tessa was fined for attempted fraud and ordered to pay court costs and restitution for the damage done to the property during her occupation. She sat motionless as the judge delivered the ruling, her face blank, her hands folded in her lap. When it was over, she stood and walked out without looking at me. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and questions. I gave a brief statement thanking the court for upholding the truth, then drove away. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, relieved, and ready to begin healing. The second rainstorm came in January, just as I was preparing to move back into the estate. This time, I stood on the covered porch while movers unloaded my boxes from a truck. Tessa pulled up in a rental car. Her repossessed vehicle had been sold at auction. She got out slowly, standing in the rain, watching her own belongings being loaded into a small moving van. We looked at each other across the driveway. Two sisters who'd lost everything that mattered while fighting over property and pride. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the rain. "About all of it." I believed her. Not because the apology fixed anything, but because I could see the genuine regret in her eyes. "Now you know how it felt," I replied quietly. Standing in the rain, watching everything taken away, feeling powerless and betrayed. She nodded, tears mixing with rainwater on her face. "I hope you find something real, Tessa. Something that matters more than money or winning." She didn't answer, just got into her car and drove away. I never saw her again. Over the next 6 months, I restored the estate to what Dad had envisioned. Not a museum to the past, but a living space with purpose. I turned it into a retreat center for families dealing with grief, offering free counseling services and support groups. The gardens became meditation spaces. The dock hosted fishing therapy sessions for veterans, honoring Dad's military service. Owen Fletcher, the accountant who'd given me the financial evidence, helped me establish it as a non-profit. Mr. Langford served on the board. Even Patricia from the county recorder's office volunteered her time. The house filled with life again, people healing, growing, learning to move forward after loss. Exactly what Dad would have wanted. I kept his study exactly as he'd left it, with a hidden compartment open now, a reminder that truth has a way of revealing itself when the time is right. On a warm June evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. The same view Dad had loved, the same peace he'd found here. People often asked if I regretted not fighting back immediately, if patience had been worth the pain of those months in exile. The answer was always the same. You don't need to scream to win. Sometimes you just need to wait for the truth to echo loud enough that everyone can hear it. Tessa had wanted immediate gratification, quick victory, recognition without earning it. She'd lost everything because she couldn't wait, couldn't build something real. I'd learned that real strength isn't about forcing your way through obstacles. It's about trusting that truth, properly documented and patiently revealed, will prevail. The estate wasn't just mine now. It belonged to everyone who needed healing, who needed proof that good things can survive betrayal, that family legacies can be honored in ways that serve others. Dad would have been proud. And that finally was enough.